Candidates will be offered opening and closing statements of 3 minutes each. Candidates will be provided 3 minutes to answer the questions. The timekeeper will hold up a sign when there is 1 minute left and a stop sign when there is no time left, and we're very technology-centric here. The moderators will cut off the candidates that exceed their allotted time, so that's going to be your guys' job. And after the formal questioning and closing statements, the candidates are encouraged to stay. So at 7 o'clock, time will be up, but the candidates are going to stay for another 25 minutes. And if you would like to introduce yourself to the candidates and chat, feel free to do that. So we're planning on being here until about 7:25. And with that, I'd like to introduce the folks that are actually participating to make sure that this works. So, to my right is Jane Foy. Jane's career in broadcasting spans 2 decades in 2 states, 4 decades. I'll correct. You need to correct your bio. 4 decades in 2 states. Starting in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and ending in Charlottesville in 2018. In 2019, Jane wrote the A to Z guide for primary caregivers for dementia patients about her experiences accompanying her husband Pat through vascular dementia. Many of you all will recognize Jane as a longtime WINA morning co-host and producer. And while I showed up at WINA many times, I actually call Jane a friend. So, and Neil Williamson serves as the executive director of the Free Enterprise Forum, a privately funded public policy organization in Charlottesville, Virginia. The Free Enterprise Forum is dedicated to fostering communication on a variety of growth, land and resource management, and economic development issues. Neil has been a guest lecturer at UVA, serves as an adjunct faculty at PVCC, and is a regular contributor to numerous publications. And Liza Bateman,
you're good.
Excuse me, is our official timekeeper with the technology.
So much of it.
And I really appreciate everybody's help tonight with making this a successful event. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Diane.
And I will collect the questions. If you raise your hand, I'll come get one. Your question.
Sally Duncan chose number 1. She's candidate number 1. So we will invite you, Sally, to begin your opening statement.
When I'm knocking on doors and sitting in people's living rooms, the one question I get asked a lot is, why in the world are you doing this? One person even said, who in their right mind would get into politics? I think that is a common response because too often it feels like politics are only for certain kinds of people and that politics only benefit certain kinds of people. I'm a public school parent and a teacher. One main reason that I wanted to do this is that often these positions are held by people in a different demographic than me. And by that, I mean that government positions are usually held by homeowners. But almost 70% of the Jack Jouett district is made up of renters. We have a lot of people in this district who work and who are working parents. I think we need more people like me in these positions. I think our community benefits when we have a wide variety of perspectives making decisions. I've spent the last 25 years raising kids, teaching them, chauffeuring them, going to their sporting events. And it turns out that being a mother of 5 kids teaches you a lot. It teaches you about conflict and getting along with a lot of different people. And when you live with a lot of people, you learn to see things from a lot of different points of views. And you get to learn a lot of different things. Over the years, I have learned to appreciate a wide variety of topics that I otherwise never would have been interested in. And that is great because I have always loved learning. A few years ago, I went to PVCC and then UVA and got my bachelor's, master's, and a graduate certificate. And when I was doing my master's, I was hired to create and teach a local high school class on local history. In my first class, ended up partnering with the Historical Society to create an entire exhibit around local history. I love this kind of work. I love researching and learning, trying to understand a problem and figuring out realistic, practical solutions that can work. From my experiences with my kids, my students, and my degrees, I know how to find and understand a wide variety of perspectives, can figure out how to get a lot of different people to work together, and can help create a community where people like each other, can get along, and even have fun with each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. And now, candidate number 2, who is Dave Shreve. Please begin your opening statement.
Thank you, Jane. And thank you, Neil and Diantha, for sponsoring tonight's forum. I really appreciate it. I simply want to let all of you know that I've been a member of this community, which I love dearly, for almost 30 years now. My family and I moved here from South Louisiana in the late 1990s. I grew up I was born in West Virginia, grew up in New Jersey and Delaware, moved to Louisiana when I was a teenager, and then made my way to Virginia in 1998. One of the things I decided to do very early in my young adulthood, pretty much about the time I entered college, was to devote my life to public policy. And so since that time, in the late 1970s, I've been a political activist, a grassroots organizer, a teacher, first at the secondary school level, and then for a number of years at my alma mater, LSU, and later here at UVA as a professor of economic history. I studied economics and history in graduate school, mostly because I wanted to be what some people would call an interlocutor, speaking between the historians and the economists who often didn't speak to one another. Because I thought a lot of the answers we were seeking could be found in that gap, about theoretical studies, but connecting them to real lives and how people actually live and operate businesses and work and so on and so forth. Along the way, I became specifically interested in a few topics. I became a specialist in healthcare finance. I served as an analyst in that regard for the Louisiana legislature for about 6 years. I also became a specialist in what you might call fiscal policy, looking especially at the way the federal, state, and local governments work together or do not. And then on top of all that, it became clear to me that one important thing that we all had to address is the intersection of race and class. And so I devoted my life to civil rights activism and studies as well. And so I bring all that to this race, hoping to focus more squarely on what matters here locally to all of us. And I think I'm a pretty good listener. I know how to ask questions and find the answers that I don't presently know. And I hope to serve all of you in that capacity as a supervisor on the county board. Thank you.
Thank you. The first question will go to candidate number 2, and we'll be alternating throughout. The first question focuses on housing. As you know, the Board of Supervisors has significant approval of housing projects. Is there this is to Mr. Shreve, is there a housing crisis today in Albemarle County? The Charlottesville region is anticipated to add about 2,000 residents annually over the next 10 years. How do you see Albemarle accommodating their portion of this regional growth?
To the question, yes, we have a housing crisis, and I would add that we've had one for some time. When I moved here in the late 90s, it was a more expensive place in which to live than South Louisiana. I saw that clearly. I was lucky because I built my own house in Louisiana, and so I had a lot of equity in hand. I've worked as a general contractor on a couple of occasions, both commercially and residentially. And one of the things I did when I put myself through college was work as a carpenter and a bricklayer and electrician. So I've kind of watched the housing industry over the years and have studied it as well. What can we do? Well, projections are projections. We never know how they'll pan out. There was a presentation today at the county board where the suggestion was, from my friends at the Weldon Cooper Center, that we're probably going to expect another 25,000 people moving into the area, Charlottesville or Albemarle County, over the next 20 years. That's entirely likely. I think we have to do a couple of things. One of the areas or ideas on which I differ sometimes from a lot of my friends is that in general, I don't think we have a shortage of housing, but more a misallocation of housing. Now, that doesn't mean we won't have to build. We're going to have to build. But I think we ought to be very serious and sincere about how we do that. And I don't think we can leave it to the marketplace. Nor do I think we can build a lot and hope that we can peel off a little bit of that new building for affordability. I think we have to be much more sharply focused on social investments, perhaps even some of our local jurisdictions in the state, including us, may have to serve as developers themselves and take it on to reduce costs, to make it more accessible, et cetera. The other thing I can say in general about housing is that it's something I have studied for decades, and I know there is no magic bullet, but there are a lot of programs that work well. And I was fortunate to have some recent discussions with some folks in a few places like Ithaca, New York, Pittsburgh, and Seattle, who have not only robust housing funds, but they have some interesting programs that have made some strides. And I think we would do wise to copy some of the best practices. They're varied. They often focus as much on preserving affordable housing and avoiding displacement as finding new homes for people. So I think we have to be really flexible, and we have to, we can't pretend that it can happen magically, in the marketplace just by building more homes.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan, is there a housing crisis in Albemarle today? The Charlottesville region is anticipated to add about 2,000 residents a year annually for the next 10 years. How do you see Albemarle accommodating their portion of this regional growth?
Yeah, I think housing affordability definitely affects everyone in the county, whether or not you own your home. Nearly everyone I've talked to is really concerned about housing affordability. People are obviously really worried about rising assessments. People living on fixed incomes are worried about affording their homes or being able to afford downsizing. I've talked to people whose adult children are having trouble buying homes here, where they grew up, and people are concerned about rising rents and being displaced by landlords. All of the housing experts seem to agree that Albemarle County today, we definitely are in a housing crisis. And this really means two things, that one, we don't have enough homes for the people who want them, and then two, people cannot afford the homes that do exist. And so, if you have, 10 people that are making minimum wage and you have 10 mansions that are on the market, you still have a housing shortage, even if you have homes. And so kind of solving this problem, we need to come at it from all sides. So we need to increase our housing supply by building more homes. We also need a streamlined process that allows homes to be built, more efficiently and maybe a little quicker. And then national best practices like having a housing trust fund, a community land trust, and developer incentives that really work to get more affordable homes. But another really big part of the housing crisis is that we have to increase wages. We don't have a huge middle class income environment with businesses here, and so working on economic development to kind of fill in that gap so that people can afford the houses that are here and for sale. The high cost of housing does not come because we have too many houses. It doesn't come because you have too many kids, and it doesn't come because you aren't working hard enough. The reason that houses cost a lot of money in Albemarle County is that land is expensive, development is slow, and we don't have enough homes for the people who work here and who want to live here. And my concern is that if we don't build, the kind of only logical outcome is that taxes and assessments are going to keep going up, and we need more residents to kind of help us share in the tax burden. I think it takes a lot of people to make Albemarle County the vibrant community that we all love. And so I think we really need to ensure that the people who work here can also live here.
Thank you, and we'll let you continue talking. Albemarle County has made a significant investment in the Rivanna Futures land purchase. Did you support this acquisition, and what, if any, role should Albemarle play in developing the property? What specific type of economic development do you see as possible to alleviate reliance on property taxes?
Yeah, I think having that amount of land that, you know, can be developed for jobs is a great thing. I think the main thing for me for economic development is that in order to reduce the tax burden on residents is we have to diversify our tax base. You know, I don't think we can continue to run the government to just on the backs of homeowners and landlords. Our budget, the business amount of like tax revenue we get is only about 11%, and for a county of our size, it should be closer to 20%. And so a few weeks ago at the Tom Tom Festival, the county executive was on a panel and he talked about this urgent need for private investment in the county. And so, you know, again, kind of focusing the middle income, middle wages that we're missing, kind of getting businesses to come that have that. We also should, you know, really continue investing in workforce development and job training and career pathways that people can move up in their careers and kind of make more wages as, you know, their life goes on. Work with our community and regional partners like PVCC for some of this. We have the Region 9 Economic Development Team. I think Albemarle County actually has a capacity to have a really vibrant economic community. There's opportunities in a wide variety of sectors. You know, personally, I really, you know, tourism and agribusiness and outdoor recreation. You know, creating a thriving community of small business owners would then create this community of middle-class wages. I think the role of the supervisor is to responsibly and thoughtfully advocate for economic growth and tax diversification, and not just say that economic growth is bad. You know, for me, the goal would be to have a variety of successful businesses and business owners that are part of the community that are helping to create the kind of Albemarle County that we enjoy living in. You know, if you make a minimum wage job in Albemarle County, if you want to rent a 2-bedroom apartment, you have to work 108 hours a week to pay for that. And a lot of people in this community and a lot of people in the Jack Jouett district specifically have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to be able to afford their home. I was at an elementary school PTO meeting a few weeks ago, and somebody casually mentioned that one of the office workers had a night job at a grocery store. And so, you know, those are the kinds of people that are struggling to afford to live here. And so we need to make sure that Albemarle County does not become a place where only wealthy people live and, you know, everybody has to commute in for these low-wage jobs. Because eventually, people aren't going to drive an hour to come work a minimum wage job. They're going to find something closer to their home. And so I think really focusing on economic development and having, you know, really good quality jobs is what we should do.
Thank you. Dave, Albemarle County has made a significant investment in the Rivanna Futures land purchase. Do you support this acquisition, and what, if any, role should Albemarle play in developing the property? What specific type of economic development do you see as possible to alleviate reliance on property taxes?
First of all, I do support that kind of acquisition. It's critically important as one step, perhaps, in the right direction. The one thing I do know about land versus the real property itself is that it's sort of fungible, so it almost doesn't matter unless you exploiting a land acquisition by a public entity like the county, then dedicate other resources toward building on that property. Because if you simply throw it out on the market expecting that your cheaper land acquisition or even absorption of that cost will then translate into lower values, that's generally mistaken, because once it goes out on the marketplace, the bidding starts, and it really doesn't matter if it's, the value is associated with the physical property or the land. It's all going to come to a certain point based on who has money, who wants it, and who's chasing it. So I think we have to be really careful about how we exploit those. The second part of that question was, what should the county do in the wake of this kind of an acquisition? And I think we should be very serious about how we use that and how we use it to our advantage. It does represent in some ways a lessened cost to the eventual construction of any kind of a building, whether it's commercial or residential on that property. And there's a lot we can do. Now, as far as diversification of taxes, that's a tough nut to crack, because I think the way localities are run today, and we're no different from many others around the nation, you're always going to rely on property taxes to some extent, unless you do a radical restructuring of taxes, getting away from certain vehicles as well. I don't think, however, that there is a real imbalance between, say, property taxes paid by residents and other taxes paid by businesses. Generally, we should understand that many of the taxes that businesses bear and pay are passed on to their consumers or their workers. And so, in a sense, it's best to look at your tax structure as something being paid by residents in general, whether it comes through property tax, sales tax, or some other vehicle, and figure out how to parse it fairly. The best way to do that, of course, which we've known for well over 100 years, is on ability to pay. So, if you're poor, you shouldn't pay as much. If you're wealthy, you should pay a little bit more. And right on in between, on a sliding scale. Sadly, and including state government as well, there is no state or locality or combination of state and locality in this country that does that right. And I'd like to fix that.
Thank you. Mr. Shreve, the next question kind of dovetails nicely with that on taxation. Albemarle County property assessments have increased significantly over the last 5 years. In FY26, Albemarle further added to its revenue increase by increasing the tax rate by 4 cents. Did you support or oppose this increase? What are your budget priorities, and how do those balance with Jack Jouett residents on a fixed budget?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. But in general, I neither supported or opposed the increases, because it's important to always remember when you're looking at property taxes in general, the rate is sort of irrelevant if your assessments are changing dramatically. You could keep the rate stable, you could drop it, but if your assessments are increasing, you're still going to pay more taxes. So what each citizen is asked to bear with that kind of a taxation is the most important thing. And it's going to be a combination of an assessment and a rate. Sometimes we're fortunate in some ways where the overall economy bestows benefits on us in terms of increased sales and tax benefits that come from the state and the federal government that we get to share, and we have a little more breathing room. Sometimes we don't have that. I would expect that the coming years are going to be rough. I don't like what I'm seeing in Washington, D.C., and even though one of the things I've learned in my career is that trickle-down economics doesn't work, one thing that does happen is that trickle-down destruction does affect people. So we're gonna see that in spades, I'm afraid. The nice thing we have going for us here is that we're gonna have a new governor, I think, pretty soon, and so we can perhaps check a different box there in terms of our relationship with Richmond and count on more support rather than less. But the other thing that should be acknowledged is that as a fairly wealthy community, one of the things that plagues us is that we get less support from the state for K-12 education as a result, compared to our counterparts in other communities. Unless we change that formula and the way we finance public education, we're always going to have to raise money on our own to pay for schooling that Richmond helps us with less and less as we become wealthier. I like what they do in Hawaii, where they have one school district, 21 localities, and the state raises all the money and then takes care of schooling on a per capita basis. They have relatively low property taxes as a result. It's a radical reform, but that's the way we should really think about this is, who can best bear the responsibility without foisting it on people who can't pay or keep up with the need to pay. And the problem with the property taxes is it's regressive and it's upside down, especially at the top and the bottom. The highest rates are paid by the poorest, and the lowest rates are paid by the wealthy. What makes it deceptive is that in the middle, it's kind of flat. So most people live there and they think it's, okay, and we just have to work with it. I'd like to change that quite dramatically if I could.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan, Albemarle County property assessments have increased significantly over the last 5 years. In FY26, Albemarle further added to its revenue increases by increasing the tax rate by 4 cents. Did you support or oppose this increase? What are your budget priorities and how do those balance with Jack Jouett residents on a fixed budget?
Yes, I did support that increase because I know we definitely need firefighters, and I was happy to see some of the money go towards schools and housing because those are, my two top priorities. I think, talking about the budget is sort of hard because we have no idea what sort of cuts we're going to be facing in the future, and so I think one of the goals is that we should prioritize the fundamentals and make sure that, if we lose, all sorts of federal funding or whatever, that people have housing, that we have schools, that they have, food, and making sure that people's basic needs are met. Government is really a last resource for people. We're kind of like the final social safety net. And so knowing that we are, providing for them and, helping people that need it is really important. So that's sort of like a budget priority is just, are people getting their basic needs met? The assessments, I will just sit and go on GIS sometimes and click around and they are ridiculously high. It's, not sustainable the way our prices are rising. And so I am very aware, especially of people living on fixed incomes, of how difficult this is. When it comes to schools, also, hopefully the state will allow us to have a 1 cent sales tax that will help fund some of the schools, that will lift some of that burden from our budget. The frustrating thing about Virginia that, a lot of people probably are aware of is that we're a Dillon rule state. And so when it comes to taxes and what we can do and what we can't do, we're really limited. And so I know one of the ways that we can help people that are struggling with rising assessments is having a tax relief system where, you can apply for tax relief. And that is the way to sort of balance out some of the tax stuff. The thing that I just keep coming back to is, we need economic development to just increase the amount of money coming in, and a really great way to do this that is not putting pressure on property owners or schools or anything else is to increase our tourism, because people will come in and they will spend our money, they will love our county, and then they will go home. And so I think that is a really important way that we can also increase our revenue.
Thank you.
Thank you once again. Sally? Since 1979, Albemarle County limits residential and commercial growth to the development areas that make up less than 5% of the county's land mass. In the last 10 years, we have witnessed over 800 acres and 3,000 potential units be removed from the development area with the creation of Biscuit Run Park. Would you support or oppose development area expansion, and why?
There are two things from Albemarle County history that are sort of related to this that I think is kind of interesting. A lot of our main roads that are in the county were actually laid out by 1750. And so we've been driving on the same roads for a couple hundred years. And also, Thomas Jefferson actually kind of expanded the Rivanna River so that he could use it for business development. And so the county is a living thing that has always been changed by the people who live here. And so, even if we were to do absolutely nothing and just freeze the county, we didn't build another house, didn't have anybody else move in, and we just lived as is, the prices would continue to rise. Some people would be forced to move. And so even not doing anything, there's still going to be change happening. I personally don't want development for the sake of development. What I want is for people to be able to afford their assessments and be able to afford a home. I want people to be able to age in place and for our children and grandchildren to be able to have a home where they grow up. There are 350 kids in Albemarle County Public Schools that are experiencing homelessness. And most people who are actually homeless actually have jobs. And the biggest reason that people are homeless is because they cannot afford a home. So, the Weldon Cooper study that my opponent referenced talks about, the amount of people we're going to have here in the next 20 years. And when they gave that presentation at one of the CAC meetings a couple weeks ago, he said that, either we need to make room for them here, or we're going to have to make room for them on our roads. And if we don't do either, we're in for a very painful future. Our WSA is in the middle of big infrastructure projects, and they started planning for those more than 20 years ago. So my concern as it relates to land use and development and housing is that we're not planning for a future that is coming and in some ways is already here. I really like the land swap idea. I know we lost a lot of acres with Biscuit Run. They've also talked about swapping out land along the river because we're not going to develop by the river. And so I think being very thoughtful about where we swap that land makes sense. I also think we can, incentivize redevelopment and infill developments in the growth area. And just my bottom line is I want to see our teachers and our librarians and our county staff be able to afford a home here. And if we can do that within our current constraints, that would be great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Dave, since 1979, Albemarle County limits residential and commercial growth to the development areas that make up less than 5% of the county's land mass. In the last 10 years, we have witnessed over 800 acres and 3,000 potential units be removed from the development area with the creation of Biscuit Run Park. Would you support or oppose development area expansion, and why?
I oppose development area expansion, mostly because I think we can solve these problems without it. And I also see very clearly that two things are likely to happen if we go that route. One would be the kind of environmental degradation that people noticed in the 1970s that led to that decision in 1979. The big issue that emerged in the 70s, as it did in many communities like ours, was providing water, clean water and enough of it. We still live in an area where we have a relatively fragile ecosystem in that regard. I don't think we can take that lightly. We're not sitting on an aquifer. Generally, we have to either catch the water in the surface and use it that way, or if you're in a rural area, put a straw on the ground and tap your own well. That puts us in a position where we can expand the water supply, and we figured out ways to do that very creatively, but only at great expense. So there you do something where it redounds to the detriment of the people who are already faced with rising costs, if it's property taxes, because that's how you're going to pay for that sort of a thing. So it's a little bit of a conundrum. What am I for? Well, I'm for infill. I'm for creative zoning changes in the urban ring, and much of Jack Jouett is urban ring. As Sally pointed out, we're the one district in the county of the others that has a majority of renters versus homeowners. And the reason for that is we have a lot of folks packed closely in to what we would call the urban ring, close to the city line. I think there's much that we can do to expand our footprint there. The other thing that I know is that there's a wide gulf between compact development and sprawl. And we know good and well that while growth in general always costs you more, if it's compact, it'll cost you less per capita as you grow, rather than sprawling into new areas. And so we have to be very careful about that if we don't want to be faced with a kind of a double whammy cost of growth that will inevitably be passed on in the form of higher property taxes or higher business taxes, or going to the state and the federal government and asking for more help and hoping that they'll come to the rescue. There's much more to it than that, but those are the things that I think are at the core of what should be our focus here, policy-wise, as we look to house and help more people in the community.
All right, moving forward to transportation. Dave, this question goes first to you. As more workers are priced out of Albemarle and Charlottesville, how do you wish to see Albemarle managing increased traffic counts generated by long-distance commutes? What are your transportation priorities?
Well, first of all, I would not give in to the projection or prediction that more of our workers will simply have to go somewhere else. I think we can fix that. Part of what we should do with our housing policy is work toward that end, and I think there are options for us at hand. But when we do that, you know, another unique feature of the Jack Jouett district, and I was surprised when I first saw this in the census data, fully 15% of our people walk to work in the Jack Jouett district. Now, I see a lot of them. I live on Barracks Road. I'm across the street, almost across the street from what used to be called Old Salem, and is now Barracks West. And a lot of those folks walk down to Barracks Road Shopping Center and they work at the Kroger or the Harris Teeter or some other place like that. It's not a safe walk. Many people do it regularly and safely, thank God. But when I sat on the Citizens Transportation Advisory Committee, I was probably one of about a nucleus of 5 or 6 who were really focused on bike ped options. I want to do more in that regard. I think we'll be able to do a lot more. And you can do a lot cheaply in that regard too. The reason we don't in most communities is that we just kind of follow the lead of the federal government and the state and plug in a few dollars and resources as we can. I think we can take the lead there instead and make a transportation system that works for us. I will be a supporter of transit as well. We already do a decent job with that. I like what we do with Jouett and with our other transit opportunities, but there's a lot more we could do as well. And I wouldn't be loath if I became a member of the Board of Supervisors to work with an organization like VACO to lobby the state, and then through the state, the federal government for more assistance in this regard. I think it's inevitable that even if we're a wealthy county, we can't do it alone.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan, as more workers are priced out of Albemarle and Charlottesville, how do you wish to see Albemarle managing the increased traffic counts generated by long-distance commutes? What are your transportation priorities?
Yeah, 60% of people who work in Albemarle County actually live outside of the county. So transportation and commuters, is a really big need and concern. I don't know anybody that likes a lot of traffic. I don't think anybody really enjoys driving down 29. And so the road capacity is a real concern, and the kinds of transportation that we're making room for. Over 50% of Albemarle County's greenhouse gas emissions comes from transportation. And so, when we kind of address transportation and commuting and getting cars off road, we're also, being very environmentally friendly. The great thing that the development area gives us is that public transit can work. You need, a dense population for a bus system to work. And so, that's one great thing that we have. I think we can make improvements to public transit, and a large part of it is funding. And so, the Regional Transit Authority has been created, and I've gone to a couple of those meetings, and they, their whole purpose is to find ways to fund a regional transit system that includes CAT and Jaunt and, various other things. One of the presentations they gave a couple of weeks ago was actually on the Afton Express, and so that is a commuter bus system that goes from Afton to UVA and kind of around the city. And so expanding those, having those, reach different areas across the county would be great. They talked about, that a lot of nurses take that, which is super helpful because then you're not driving an hour after you've been working all day. So really expanding commuter transportation options would be really great. And then also, making sure that we have really good bike and pedestrian infrastructure in the urban ring is really important. Especially we have, Albemarle High School, we have this whole campus here, making sure that, people can walk and get around places. Right now, actually, VDOT is running a survey about the Route 29 corridor, and they have options on there for adding, if you're interested in bike and ped infrastructure, you can add that. If you haven't seen the survey, you should fill it out. If you're concerned about Route 29, it's super easy to do. And then, with our transit and with CAT in particular, making sure the routes that we have in the county and in our district work. And also, a lot of our bus stops are not ADA accessible. And so I think that is actually a really big priority that we should kind of work on figuring out how to make those bus stops more accessible.
Thank you.
Sal, how do you feel about ranked choice voting? And if elected, will you vote to adopt it for Albemarle County? If you are not in favor of ranked choice voting, what are your concerns?
Yes, I got several emails about this almost immediately within announcing that I was running, and it was so interesting. I am super in favor of it. It makes sense to me. I think, social movements need momentum. And so the more you see people doing it, the more you're like, oh, I'll do that too. And so I know obviously in Albemarle County, in maybe all elections, it doesn't matter because we don't usually have that many people on the ballot. But I think doing it allows the communities that do need it, and it would be helpful to be like, oh, hey, there's one more municipality doing it. And I also, know that, it can be a little confusing when you're switching to a new system. So if we switch to it when it doesn't matter, and there aren't, 3 or 4 people on the ballot, you get used to it, and you get used to knowing what the ballot looks like. So then if we are ever at a point when it, would actually be used, people are familiar with it. And so, I think it would be a great idea.
All right, Dave, how do you feel about ranked choice voting? If elected, will you vote to adopt it for Albemarle County? If you are opposed to ranked choice voting, what are your concerns?
I like it, and I will vote yes to support it. I will also say this, that there's a movement to institute it statewide, and studies have shown that it works a little better when you do it that way, but if localities have to lead, they have to lead. And we can lead by example. So I most definitely support it for one principal reason. Despite some of the pitfalls, Sally pointed out accurately that if you don't do a good job of educating people about it, they can be confused. We saw that in Phoenix, Arizona, when they introduced it at the 11th hour, and particularly there was a problem in Hispanic communities understanding what was going on. So we have to be careful, of course. We have to introduce it early and tell people all about it and educate them. That's easy to do. I'm not worried about it. So yes, I think we should plunge in. And what it does clearly, unequivocally, is that it increases voter engagement. Shape that as you will if you're a politician. It can lead you to the mushy middle, it can lead you to the extremes, all sorts of directions, but increased voter engagement is a good thing, and I think we should especially salute that here in Thomas Jefferson's hometown.
Great. David, next question comes to you, and I'll be merging 3 of the audience questions together, so it's going to be jam-packed for opportunities for you to chat. Albemarle County is known to be the most challenging of all the surrounding counties for commercial permits for renovations, rezonings, and new builds. Do you have any recommendations how to make this process more efficient? What are your thoughts on zoning reform, and what are your views about affordable housing outside the growth area, i.e. mobile home parks. A lot in there.
Yeah, so, but those are all pretty straightforward questions, and they're really important ones, too. So we've had a lot of experience in a lot of communities, including our own, with streamlining approval processes, and I support those. One of the things that's kind of a misconception about regulations and zoning is that the costs of the regulations themselves are excessive. Generally, what I've found, and I've worked as a builder, and so I saw this firsthand, it's not so much the costs of the regulations that you have to meet that are excessive, and most builders, for example, actually like the things you're telling them to do. Often has to do with insulation or building integrity and safety and things like that. Nobody's against that. But what we tend to do is we want to do it on the cheap, so we don't pay for it as a community. We ask the builder or the commercial enterprise to pay for it instead. And that gets to be obnoxious after a while. If it's a community good we're talking about, and I think this falls into that category, the community should support it and not expect just users to pay for it. Generally, user fees are among the most regressive and unresponsive kinds of fees and taxes that you can impose. So I'd like to fix that. It should be a process where we come to expect uniform and regular types of applications, and we've made strides in this regard, and I think we can make more to make that easier. A simple, short step process where you don't have to involve multiple bodies. So I'm wholeheartedly in favor of those kinds of reforms and pushing forward. And did I leave something out at the end there?
The affordable housing outside the growth area, i.e. mobile home parks.
Yes, so I'm glad they cited mobile home parks, because I think it's really incumbent upon us, if there's a mobile home park in jeopardy of being removed, that we really focus acutely and sharply on ensuring that everybody displaced gets a home. And I would argue that they should have a home at least equal to what they had before, but generally vastly improved as well, because we can do that. One of the problematic trends in the building trades in recent years is the size of homes have crept up. When I was working as a builder and a carpenter back in the 1970s, the average size home was about 1,500 square feet. Now it's about 2,600. So we can concentrate our efforts on that, on building more cottage-style starter homes. The Census Bureau defines a starter home as 1,400 square feet or less. We're not building them anymore.
And as an aside, the Free Enterprise Forum described a starter home when we were getting out as one where we didn't have to unplug the vacuum cleaner. All right, Sally, Albemarle County is known to be the most challenging of all surrounding counties for commercial permits for renovations, rezonings, and new builds. Do you have any recommendations how to make this process more efficient? What are your thoughts on zoning reform? And what is your view on affordable housing outside the growth area, i.e. mobile home parks?
Yes. There was a pipeline report done in the fall that was sort of talking about housing that's sort of, in process, and it said that around 155 units had been approved by right, and over 11,000 had gone through legislative review, which means you're coming before Planning Commission, you're coming before Board of Supervisors, going back and amending things, coming back and doing it again and again and again. And so it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money, and so that is a huge, huge problem, especially when it comes to getting more homes and getting affordable homes. So yeah, I think we should make a lot more of this by right, that you don't have to go through legislative review like this. Part of that means matching our zoning code to our comp plan, so that in the comp plan, when it says, we're allowing density in this area, that you can just go and do it. Another thing is, we need more site plan reviewers. We just need to speed up the process of kind of having your plans looked at. Another thing that we can do that would kind of, address some of this development stuff and, getting homes for people is even having like an affordable housing overlay in the zoning and comp plan stuff, so that if you are building affordable units, maybe you get, extra density or something. So yes, that's the kind of zoning stuff. I also think, for things like the mobile home parks in the rural area, we're not really putting more of them in the development area because we want to, maximize the density. So I think in areas where it makes sense in the rural area that we should do them. I know there was one, in the news, I think last fall, and they got denied, and like 7 or 8 years ago, there was an elementary school 6 miles away from that closed because there wasn't enough people to support the school. And then somebody wanted to put in mobile homes and it got denied, and so we're making it where we can't have people living near our schools. I know we have some elementary schools that are kind of out in the county that don't have a lot of students there. And so making these decisions where it makes sense and where there's community support and that you have a school that you can go to if you live there makes sense. So it's, being thoughtful about it. And I also think we need to really make sure that we're protecting the affordable housing that we have in the county, making it so that people can stay in their homes, so that somebody's not just coming in and buying up these affordable homes and bulldozing them and putting a mansion on the land. And so working to really preserve the affordable housing that we also have.
Great.
Sally, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Sally, Albemarle has different response times depending on your land use designation. Rural area residents are told to expect slower response from police, fire, EMS. Do you support this kind of response system?
I mean, I think obviously ideally the response time is as fast as it, as we can get it down to. One of the reasons that we did have the tax increase this time was so that we could hire firefighters to staff some of these places and have faster response times. It's hard when, I used to live out in Boonesville before I moved to Earlysville, and so for about 7 years, so we lived literally in like the northwest corner of the county, and it took a long time to get home, and it was gorgeous out there. We didn't have very many neighbors. We were on a big plot of land, and it was really gorgeous. It took a half hour if we wanted to get a gallon of milk. I think one of the benefits that you get when you live in the rural areas is that, it is more pretty. There are less cars, you have less neighbors. And I think, there is a trade-off to that, it takes time to drive on the roads, even if you're a fire engine driving down. And so finding that balance and working to obviously make it as fast as possible, but I think the rural areas have been, resistant to some development, and so trade-offs, I think, have to happen. And I don't know what the exact balance is. And again, hiring the firefighters was a really good thing that we did. And so I guess working to make that better is always the goal.
Thank you. Dave, Albemarle County has different response times depending on your land use designation. Rural area residents are told to expect slower response from police, fire, EMS. Do you support this response system?
Sort of. I would have hired a new public relations officer, though, to put it in different terms. There's a big difference between having a minimal difference in response times than slower. So I think we can. I think Sally said the same thing. We can expect some of this just because of the varying need and the distance. And I was born in West Virginia, where my grandparents lived in a coal mining camp, and boy, they they didn't have very fast response times there at all. So I know what that means, and it can be tragic. But we deliver these services, I think, pretty efficiently here in the county. At the presentation today, which was all about a cost-benefit analysis, the analyst, Dr. Refan, with whom I worked over at the Cooper Center, talked about how the cost of public safety in the county, in our county, is below the average for the state. I think that's a good and bad thing. The good side of that is that it means we probably have relatively less need than some places because we are a relatively safe community and we work together and we stick together and we care about our neighbors, and that translates into more modest public safety needs. On the other hand, the bad side of that is that we've probably ignored the costs for a few years and we've got to beef them up. And when I said earlier I didn't support or disapprove of the rate increase, it was because I had a hard time really getting my hands around, what we were facing, and it wasn't easy to parse. But clearly, we needed to add to our public safety budgets, and we'll probably have to continue to do so in the near future, and I would support that.
Mr. Shreve, the next question is again a mixture of a couple of questions focusing on outdoor recreation. What are your opinions on the importance of recreational shared use trails to connect our communities? Where do you see the priority of funding Three Notched Trail, Crozet to Seaville, and the Old Mills Trail, Pantops to Glenmore? What are your opinions about changing the code at Ragged Mountain Reservoir to allow the city, who is actually the landowner, to determine the appropriate usage that does not impact water supply?
Again, a lot to unpack there, but in general, I served for a little over 11 years as the executive director of a nonprofit some of you may know, called Wintergreen Adaptive Sports. We teach persons with disabilities how to ski and snowboard and how to kayak and canoe in a smaller summer program. I got involved with that program years ago. My oldest daughter has spina bifida, and she became a skier when she was at the Kluge Rehab Center getting some braces fitted. She saw a brochure for the program on the countertop and grabbed it and asked me if I'd take her up on the mountain later on that winter, which I did, became connected to them, and I still work with them today. So I'm all about accessibility to outdoor recreation. I think we can do much more. I think we do a pretty good job here of doing so already. Sometimes relying on nonprofits like Wintergreen Adaptive Sports and many others who do the same thing. She was a participant in the CART riding therapy, some of you may know, out in Whitehall. When I was on the CTAC, I worked closely with a consultant from Portland. And what I liked about what they did in Portland that I'd like to see us duplicate and do more here is that they did do a lot of trails, and they were recreational in purpose, but they were also commuter trails. And I think a lot of communities screw up when they just focus on one or the other. I'd like to integrate it so that people can get recreation, they can commute, and guess what? You can kill two birds with one stone sometimes as well. I did that when I taught at UVA. I live on Barracks Road. I rode a bicycle to work whenever I could. Sometimes quite treacherously, but I still tried to do it, So I'd like to see how that could be made much more easy for our citizens and much more accessible. Now, about the water supply, and you kind of begged the question, or the person who wrote the question did, in saying, if we do it right, or do you support it? Yes, of course. I think that's the key, is you've got to figure out how to do that and integrate the uses. We have a lot of smart people who know how to do it here. One of them's in the room here. He's an architect who can tell us, I think, how to protect water resources while we build trails. So I'm very confident that we can accomplish both ends there. Keep our water supply intact and expand access to nearby lands for recreational biking or hiking. And I used to, on that particular tract of land, I used to, never mind, I won't tell the story.
He got the stop sign.
I used to go out there and listen to Edgar Allan Poe poetry.
All right, Ms. Duncan, what are your opinions on the importance of recreational shared-use trails to connect our communities? Where do you see the priority of funding the Three Notch Trail, Crozet to Charlottesville, and the Old Mills Trail, Pantops to Glenmore? What are your opinions on changing the code at Ragged Mountain Reservoir to allow the city, the landowner, to determine the appropriate usage that does not impact the water supply?
Yeah, I think one of the great things about Albemarle County is how gorgeous it is, what a great outdoor recreation space it is, and I think we have not even come close to really expanding the usage that people can have, increasing the tourism for that, giving people, that live here the opportunities to do that. And so, yeah, I think the trail systems are great. It would be amazing if you could just ride your bike across the county, and I know they've talked about the trail, going all the way down to Virginia Beach and through Richmond, and I think that would be a really, really cool thing to have. I know my kids are cross-country runners, and so I also really know how important keeping our dirt roads that we have are, and, keeping those safe for runners, and, we have a huge running community here. Yeah, I think, having access to biking at Ragged Mountain is also a great thing. I think there's a lot of ways that we can have people enjoy the outdoors, enjoy it safely in a way that's still protecting and keeping the environment, great and still looking like the outdoors that we, love seeing. Yesterday morning, actually, there were some hot air balloons above our house, and that's a great tourism way to people can see the environment and see the mountains and see how gorgeous this is, in a way that, brings in tourism tax dollars and literally isn't hurting anything because it's up in the sky. So I think there's a lot of creative ways. I know, there's other communities that are really outdoor centered and have all of these ways. We went to Denver a couple of years ago, and you could take a bus from Denver to the mountains, and it would drop you off, and you could hike, and then you'd take the bus back. So having a bus that would take people up to the Shenandoah Mountains and go hiking and then ride back. I think there's a lot of really great creative ways that we can, expand our use of the outdoors.
Great, thank you.
Sally, what do you think the Board of Supervisors could do to encourage new businesses to settle in Albemarle County as opposed to, say, the contiguous counties?
We have a lot of economic development plans and regional plans that have, all sorts of ideas and ways and businesses that they want to target in industries that they've identified as targeted businesses. I think working with UVA is probably a very natural partner. They are, in the county, and working, especially with the new biotech facility that's getting built, and really, identifying businesses there that we could help, create and have them, be here. One really important thing that businesses need is land to put their businesses on. And so, incentivizing redevelopment in the development area is a really important part, but making sure that we have land for businesses to come to. Another way that we can incentivize businesses to build here and to exist here is their employees need to be able to live here. And so if there is not housing for employees, it's going to be hard for businesses to want to come here when they can go to other areas that have, more accessible and affordable housing. And so, economic development is really intertwined with housing, and when we improve one, we improve the other. And so I think it takes kind of a holistic look to be how can we fix it here? We need housing, we need incentives for businesses, and then what businesses are we targeting? What are their needs, and how do we get them here?
Thank you. Dave, what do you think the Board of Supervisors could do to encourage new businesses to settle in Albemarle County over perhaps our other contiguous counties?
Well, I served on the Economic Development Authority for 8 years, and I wrestled with this question all the time. First of all, I think that I was often a distinct voice in one respect, and that was I really wanted to focus most of my energy and attention on helping businesses that were already here but perhaps struggling to survive and stay in business. I think we can do a lot more in that respect, and therefore kind of flesh out our constant need for business activity and a thriving business community by focusing inward. The other conundrum that we often face is that if you're looking at, say, maybe two classes of business, and one would be a high-tech, kind of sexy, my dad was a biochemist and he worked with biomedical companies, and everybody wants one of those in their community, carries high added value and so forth. Generally, because of the complexity and the significance of scale in some of those enterprises, you're almost always going to be bringing in a new business and new employees. So they're typically not going to hire from within the ranks of your own citizens, whether they're underemployed or unemployed. So you've got to make room for the new folks, and that's sometimes a challenge. If you're not doing that, and it's, say, a hotel or a grocery store or something a little more pedestrian, you often run the risk of cannibalizing existing businesses because it's always difficult to really figure that out on the margins, what you really need and what you really don't need. So it's often a really complex thing, which, maybe I was guilty of punting on this too often, but my instinct was that it was so much easier to work with businesses and to cultivate more success when you focused inward and focused on the ones who needed help here in the county. Now, the other thing I would say is that we too often look at economic development in two ways that I think are relatively meaningless. One is, what can it do to your tax base, and what can it do to help you solve unemployment or underemployment problems? Typically, it won't really help you much in either of those things, just by the nature of the way it works. But what it will do is it will add to economic activity, which is a different thing altogether, and it will add often an intangible social advantage to your community. So I always urge my fellow directors on the EDA to look at it through that lens. Is this an enterprise that will add value to our community, even if it doesn't help us with our tax base, even if it doesn't help us hire the unemployed or the underemployed, but will it add value in some other way? And if the answer is yes, then we work to recruit them. If you're not sure, maybe you take a different turn.
Thank you. This will be our last prepared question, and then we'll be moving to closing statements. After that, there will be about a 25-minute period for the audience to mix and mingle. And I want to compliment the audience, some of the best questions I've ever received on these cards. But the question to you, Dave, is one about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Earlier this year, several organizations in the community called on Albemarle County for a $10 million annual commitment to an Affordable Housing Trust Fund. What is your opinion of this as an annual operating budgeted expenditure?
I support it wholeheartedly. I suspect that even though if you take a community like Pittsburgh that does a pretty good job with their Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the programs for which I admire and find to be uniquely successful, they're a bigger city. They only have 10 million. I think it still might be too little. I think we might need to look toward the future and, getting there as fast as we can, but even augmenting that figure. Now, I would be loath to suggest how to do that right now because I'm not sitting on the board and I haven't had the luxury of sitting down and looking at the nitty-gritty of the budgets and where we can save and where we can extend ourselves. But I would say that this has to be a critical priority. And so I would do everything in my power to make sure we get to that figure and in the out years, expand it where we could. But maybe even more importantly, I would also suggest that there are a lot of interesting and creative ways that we could use that fund. In Pittsburgh, for example, they had two unique programs that were quite successful. One of them, where they spent the most money, was eviction prevention. And they saved a lot of people from becoming homeless. Secondly, they had a small landlord program, so they recognized that some of the most affordable housing in their community were old stock housing owned by families who had owned the properties for generation after generation. They'd burned their mortgages, therefore they had kind of low carrying costs, and they could pass that on to their renters. But what plagued them was when they had an unforeseen emergency, and like they had to replace the whole air conditioning unit or flooded a basement or something like that, and they had to knock out some walls, and they just couldn't do it. They had to sell to a developer. They couldn't afford the repairs. If they borrowed to do so, they had to pass on the cost to their tenants, and quickly they went from becoming an affordable place to a unaffordable place. Now, unfortunately, Pittsburgh limited that to 8 units or less, and so they didn't cover much of the territory. It's hard to say where we could begin with a program like that, but we have AHIP, and I think what AHIP does for tenants, we could also do for landlords and owners on a certain scale, where we find affordable or reasonably affordable housing and try to keep it that way.
Thank you. Ms. Duncan, the question comes to you. Earlier this year, several organizations in the community called for a $10 million annual spending for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. What is your opinion of this as an annual operating budget expenditure?
Yes, I am fully in support of fully funding the Housing Trust Fund. The challenge, obviously, is that the goal is that it is revolving money, that every year we're putting 10 million into it. And so figuring out where that 10 million comes from is, something that will take time and creativity to figure out. But it's desperately needed because we are in a housing crisis, and we need to prioritize getting homes for people. One of the really cool things that the Housing Trust Fund can do is that we can use it to say, we want proposals that will build homes that cost $250,000. And we will give you, X percent towards this. And then the developers will come back with all of the other funding, the other 90% of the funding for it. And so it's a way, how it's been used nationally, to really bring in other money that the municipality isn't having to pay. And so it's a way to just, maximize the funds and target the developments you want, instead of just letting developers, build whatever houses that, maybe everybody can't afford. And so you can target what kind of developments you want. So I think it's a really smart way. I think, we definitely should prioritize funding it. There's other housing tools that we can use, like the Community Land Trust is another great option that we can use to kind of keep homes affordable. But you can also use the Housing Trust Fund for, like, fixing up older homes, or, mobile homes are actually very energy inefficient. And so you can use some of that funds to help, make these homes more energy efficient, and so that people can afford to stay there without having high energy bills. And so, there are a lot of ways that you can use housing trust funds to, protect and preserve and create affordable homes. And it's a national best practice. And so I think that should be one of our top priorities when we're looking at how do we create more affordable homes.
Thank you. Closing arguments? Okay.
Arguments, no statements.
I'm thinking like a lawyer. Dave, would you please begin your closing statement?
Yes, I'll keep it very brief because I think we've had a pretty good discussion in a lot of detail of some of the important issues. And since the housing thing is foremost in mind at this point, I'll add one quick thing. Sally mentioned the advantage of bringing in other money. I mentioned earlier that I looked at the Ithaca program, and I liked a lot of things about that, and there were two in particular. One was whenever they did something like that, where they tried to leverage, that's the common word that you hear used over and over again, they didn't just encourage, but they required a nonprofit partner. And they did that for two reasons. One was to reduce expenses even further. Let's say if you're adding on to a land trust acquisition, something to that effect. But more importantly, maybe as importantly, the nonprofits were eligible for grants from state and federal governments that the private developer would not be eligible for. And so the idea is you reduce costs and then you pass that on to the homeowner or the tenant, whether it's single-family housing or whether it's multiple family dwellings. And the Cornell Ithaca area did that quite well. The other thing I liked about the Ithaca program is that, like us, they live in an area surrounded by incredible natural beauty, and they were really intent on preserving that. And so they did a good job of focusing their development in a compact area, infill, not sprawling. They did have one luxury that sort of made this easier politically. They had a big controversy out near Seneca Falls with the Seneca Meadows landfill. And it became a kind of a cancer alley because of problems they had associated with that. And so there was a lot of citizen activism that was, at the barricades already, ready to defend the environment and the natural resources around them. Accordingly, they did a good job of, again, focusing on infill and compact development. And I think it's just one of many. There are many of these that you could describe as best practices. I don't think there is one or two or three, so that's a bit of a misnomer. There are dozens, and I think we can learn from all of them. And I just want to finish by thanking everybody to come out to this on a kind of a bleak and rainy day in May, which is, as Neil and I know, our birthdays are in May. May is supposed to be a sunny month, right, Neil? And so thank you to all of you for coming out tonight. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave. And Sally, would you begin your closing statement, please?
There's one thing that hasn't really kind of come up in the questions tonight that I think really matters to the Jack Jouett district. And so this is probably going to feel a little bit out of left field, but I think it's really important to also say. One of the things that I've learned in creating my local history class and teaching Albemarle history for a few years is how fascinating the history is here. We have a princess, people have made movies here. My personal favorite is that there was a circus headquartered in Boonesville for a long time. And so there's a lot of really great things in Albemarle County history. But the county also has a really long history of oppression and denying people their civil rights. I am highly cognizant of the fact that Carrie Buck is buried not even 5 miles away from us. And I make sure to cover Buck versus Bell every year in my history class. And if you don't know the story, Carrie was from Charlottesville and she was the first woman sterilized, and the Supreme Court signed off on it. And the idea of population control was a huge part of the eugenics program, and the United States spent decades sterilizing people without their consent. My opponent does not support forced sterilization, but he does support population control. And he supports ending tax breaks if you have more than 2 kids. And he sees it as a good thing when population declines. We're electing a representative for the Jack Jouett district, a district that has the highest amount of people in the county who are low income, who are minorities, refugees, renters. Our public schools have the highest percentage of kids who need services. And I'm worried that we're going to keep these same old attitudes towards people, that there are too many of them and that they are too costly. I don't see people as a burden. I see people as possibilities, people that make this county work. What we love about Albemarle is because of the people who are here. We love nature and the parks. It takes people to maintain it, run the parks, and preserve it. The community aspects of Fridays After 5 or the book festival or the film festival. All of this is because of the people who live here. And in Albemarle County, there is room for many different people. If you love books, if you love gardening, if you love making movies or board games or roller derby or running, there is a place for you here. And so people are not burdens that weigh the county down. I think they are what makes Albemarle County worth living in. And so, I am in this race because I don't want to see fewer people here. I want to see a community where everybody can thrive.
Thank you.
Thank you.